Here are some tips in maintaining a dialogue, because really, in order for a conversation to be truly effective for both people, it needs to include both people and be a dialogue. You want to demonstrate respect for the other person. Avoid putting down the other person flatly with negative criticism. Doesn't mean you can't be critical, but respect the other person and what they're saying and be honest in your criticism. There are some implicit rules, or rules that are, by implicit, I mean rules that are assumed when people are in conversation. And these actually have something to do with politeness, definitely. Don't interrupt. Let the person get their message across. That's a way of cooperating. Repeating back what the other person said, if necessary, to be sure that you understand. Directing your gaze and your eye contact when you're spoken to. And there are some others we learned, I'm sure, when we were growing up, such as don't talk while you're eating. Maybe you can add some to that. Some of those assumed rules associated with carrying out a conversation. Let's talk about self-disclosure and what it is. Self-disclosure is a type of communication in which you reveal information about yourself that you'd normally keep hidden or that others would not know unless you tell them. It's sharing something about yourself or something in it that involves you. Self-disclosure. Think back to chapter 3 when we were talking about the self, the Johari window. What is the name of the quadrant where we keep information that we know about ourselves but other people don't know? It's the hidden self. And when we self-disclose, we move information from the hidden self to the open self. It's interesting to note that this seems to take place between people, what we call the dyadic effect. This means that if one person discloses information about themselves, it creates a sort of trust to some degree that encourages the other person to share as well. And self-disclosure is usually displayed as a sign of trust and affection, certainly trust. What's the value in sharing anything of ourselves with another person? Those things that people don't know about us unless we tell them. Well, a couple that I'd like to talk about here are improved coping ability. I've experienced this. I can say that when I was much younger, my mother was an she became an alcoholic during the time I was still at home. And I was really ashamed of this in some way because I just didn't know how to deal with it. And I really felt that I was the only person, the only teenager who was experiencing this. So I didn't like to share this with people very often. Well, when I finally did, it came out in a conversation I was having with another person. I can't remember who it was, but I shared that. I said, "Oh, my mom is an alcoholic." And the other person said, "Oh, my dad is too." That instantly gave me a feeling of some kind of, it gave me an assurance, a feeling that I could cope with this because I wasn't the only person in the world dealing with it. So self-disclosing we tend to use that dyadic effect, and other people feel more open about sharing something of themselves when we share something of ourselves. So it's really a way to build relationships. Have you ever tried to make a friend and that person does not share anything of themselves with you? How did that friendship turn out? It's hard to make a friend, isn't it? when people don't share something of themselves. There are risks. There are certainly risks. If people are mean-spirited, I would say, sharing something of yourself when they might use it against you. I'm sure some of us have experienced this. So it is a risk. But we like to think the rewards are greater than the risks. It's interesting that research has shown that certain people have more of a willingness to self-disclose than others. For instance, it's been shown that women, females, tend to feel more comfortable sharing of themselves than males. That's a generalization again, but in general. Do you think that's true? Another factor is your audience. Well, we certainly can see that. I'm sure that you'd be more willing to share more personal details of your life with your best friend than you would with just the person sitting next to you in class who you've never met before this class. They also say that our culture tells something about, teaches us something about what we can disclose, the topic, and the last one, the channel of communication. CMC stands for Computer Mediated Communication. And we've discovered that the disinhibition effect seems to take place in computer mediated communication. There's something about being anonymous, or at least not having your face right there, or being face to face. We tend to overshare a bit on the internet. Golly, do you think that's true? I have a tendency to think so. Here are some guidelines for self-disclosure, because really consider your motivation, how appropriate it is, the other person's willingness, because remember now, if someone shares, if you share something with someone, very personal information, sometimes that other person is uncomfortable with it. They don't know how to respond, or they might even feel compelled to think that they need to share the same type of information, and it could make them uncomfortable. So just take into consideration the burdens that might be placed on the other person. I have one example of this that's really extreme, but this really has to do with motivation and the burdens placed on the other person. I heard of a man once who shared with his mother-in-law that he had been cheating on his wife. How do you think the mother-in-law felt about this, having this information? Would she feel compelled to tell her daughter? Or how, she was kind of stuck in a situation there. Really a wild situation, but this really did happen. I didn't know the people, I only heard about it. But some guidelines for self-disclosure. And when someone else is self-disclosing, it might be a situation where they're really pouring their heart out to you, and they're really sharing something that they have to get off their chest. And feel that it's, you should take this as a compliment of trust. You might want to think about practicing active listening, certainly support the person, reinforce how they're feeling. Don't feel that you have to share. It's always up to you if you really want to share the same type of information. Don't feel pressured to do that. More on being pressured into self-disclosure. Don't be pushed. Stand up for yourself. Don't feel that you have to self-disclose. Giving compliments can be awkward. Receiving compliments can be awkward. Receiving a compliment, a simple thank you, is all that's necessary. Putting the art of conversation, using active listening, the stages of relationships, and the role of disclosure all together are shown in a video that we will see in class. It's true that anyone can be a good conversationalist. Even if you think you're shy, you can certainly be a good conversationalist, because you know what? Being a good listener is most of it. Listening can be more important than talking. Focusing on the other person, allowing them to talk, not interrupting, making eye contact, asking questions, there's the active listening. Talk with intention, but listen intently. The art of conversation truly does lie in listening. What about apologies? Have you ever had to attempt to make an apology? They have a place in verbal communication and certainly in conversation. An apology expresses regret or sorrow for having done what you did or for what happened. It's a statement that you're sorry for something that was viewed as negative. The best apologies contain these 6 elements. Admit it. Fess up to it. I did it. Mean the words. Be sincere. I'm sorry. Be specific as regarding what you're sorry for. Put yourself in the other person's place. Empathize. Give an expression of your understanding of how it made them feel. Assure them that it won't happen again and mean it. Avoid excuses. And choose the appropriate channel. Texting doesn't necessarily work, depending on the situation. You might need to do it face to face. Now, we're going to talk quite a bit about apologies in class, but these are the basics to get you started.